Welcome to our channel, where we set out to explore wonderful, great works of literature.
While dressed in elegant clothing, because
Why the hell not? Well, as you've probably noticed wherever you are, the season's been changing. It's been getting a little bit cooler. It's been getting darker much earlier. So we are now moving into, obviously, I think we're a little bit into the fall season already, and we're moving closer, edging closer towards winter. And with that, with the cold weather, comes something spooky.
Yeah.
Spooky tales, scary stories.
Spooky tales in preparation for Halloween.
That's right. And so, in this month of October, of course, the month situated with Halloween at the end of the month, we wanted to start a little bit of a marathon, a reading marathon.
Okay, that's how you want to call it?
Yeah, it's the most original title, a reading marathon. And we wanted to encourage our viewers to actually go and check out one of the challengers that we have wanted to nominate, Tristan and the Classics. He has a wonderful YouTube channel. And we wanted him to actually get this video and to take up the challenge of reading or maybe one or two Victorian 19th century novels or novellas or short stories
that are gothic or spooky.
And he's our favorite Welshman. And he's a
fellow booktuber.
And a fellow booktuber, and he loves the classics. So we thought we'd reach out and challenge Tristan to do a video on his favorite scary story.
Yes.
Yes, indeed. So today we wanted to touch upon Robert Louis Stevenson. He's actually one of my favorite Scottish writers. And I can start off with a little bit of bibliographic note on him.
Yeah.
And you'll find this interesting. So Robert Louis Stevenson was born in Edinburgh in 1850. He was son of a civil engineer.
One of Sean's favorite places.
But here's this, get this. He was expected to follow the family profession, but finally was allowed to study law at the University of Edinburgh.
Sounds like a parallel story to your life.
This is very much a parallel story to my life. So yes, I'm very familiar with the haunts of Robert Louis Stevenson. In fact, across the street from the law buildings, there's a small writers museum, and you can find a lot of his manuscripts and a lot of his original works there. It's actually a nice little cozy place to go, and it's actually free. I'm not sure how it is now. It was a while ago, but it was free at the time.
It was free when we went.
It was free at the time. That's
yes.
right. And so obviously this is one of his most popular tales. In fact, it's really seeped into the imagination of culture.
Yeah, it's even like sentences are used to describe people. Oh, why are you acting like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde?
That's right.
My mom used to say that when I was a moody teenager.
That's right. The goth version of it. So this full title is The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And what's interesting is the first 8 or 9 chapters are kind of like a detective story.
Mm-hmm.
The way it's presented. So it doesn't immediately evoke a sense of horror, but something odd and mysterious is happening.
Yes.
And it's only until the final reveal, which I'm sure many people out there already know what the final reveal is. Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
But
no, I would say even the first scene when the two gentlemen are walking, and it's kind of the description of the city streets and the almost murder of a young child. That was pretty gruesome. That starts off on a
pretty disturbing.
Spooky.
Somewhat spooky, yeah, I would say, yeah. And so what you realize is, of course, Dr. Jekyll is the outstanding, virtuous citizen, very kind of like straight-laced. People kind of have long-standing relations with him, these main characters who are describing, unfolding the plot. And they've had these, he's a good friend, but lately something bizarre has taken over.
Yeah, I mean, they hint that he had his kind of wild days when he was in university, so he had a dark side to him, and they're like, oh, but he's long past abandoned that.
Yeah.
Right?
And he's made a bit of a name for himself in his community, right?
Yeah. I think what I liked about it is that the kind of general understanding of the story is that there's this person with split personality, right? That's what people understand it to be.
Right.
But I loved the more philosophical perspective of it, that we cannot possibly, like, every human has, to an extent, a virtuous and dark side, and we cannot simply just abandon our dark side. That's part of our nature. And in fact, the more we try to push that away, or literally separate ourselves from it, and the more virtuous we try to act, the more evil kind of steps in.
Yeah. Well, it's like exactly.
Yeah,
it's
it
like,
kind of combines seeps and steps.
but it's like, yeah, fair enough. But there's a metaphysical component to it,
Yeah.
and I believe he was also, what did he say? He was Presbyterian. So this was something that he tried to grapple with throughout his writings and his life. This problem of evil, if you will, and the nature of evil.
Mm-hmm.
And for sure, like, this kind of, if you want to take a Jungian lens, it's like, this is like, Hyde is the shadow side of Dr. Jekyll. And just like you cannot have darkness without light, or light without darkness, every time he tried to appear to do good, and I think that's the key, right?
Yeah.
He tried to appear to do good, but he was also, Dr. Jekyll was also very aware that he took a certain perverse pleasure in the doings of Mr. Hyde.
Yeah.
And as much as he tried to appear doing good, he kind of only made the power of Hyde stronger and stronger.
Yeah. Like, he didn't want to have the consequences.
That's right.
It starts out as like kind of foolish acts, and then it gets darker and darker and darker and darker, almost like an addiction, right? It starts out as something kind of fun and trivial, and then and non-serious and non-professional, and then it ends up being darker stuff.
And he begins to sort of enjoy that moment of release from, and this is key, I think they said, like, moral obligations.
Yeah.
He wanted to completely remove that element, that sort of the decorousness, the etiquette, the virtue, the goodness, and he wanted to almost bask in the vile.
Yeah.
And it became this, he completely almost bisected himself.
Yeah.
You know, into two halves, and that's what this radical break is. And then, of course, you know.
But I think I just want to go back to the one point of, like, he appears to do good, and I think there was an element to his virtuous side that was in the beginning quite genuinely benevolent and kind, and then it's almost like the more his Hyde side got away with him, the less his good side actually was virtuous. You know, like, genuinely virtuous. He wasn't able to.
Yeah, that's right. And there's also, like, I found it very interesting also when he kind of like allowed himself to be led into Hyde's sort of monstrosities and evil. It was almost like he had bound himself to Hyde.
Mm-hmm.
And even if when he got to a certain point where he was absolutely mortified with what Hyde was doing, he still was cursed to keep that pact. And it was almost a pact of secrecy. And in a way, it kind of speaks to this idea that, you know, and this is something that it comes up in another one of his short stories, which is in this collection. By the way, there's 3 short stories here, along with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. But in the Body Snatchers, there's a similar theme that happens when two people are in communion with one another through something illicit and something evil. Mm-hmm. They are bound to one another to such a degree that they are both pulling each other down, and there is no almost escape from it.
Yeah.
You know, it's like kind of like it wills itself into its absolute destructive point.
Yeah, that's actually a good segue into the Body Snatchers.
Sure.
If you want to describe that.
One more thing I wanted to say.
Yes, sir.
What did you think about the caricaturing of Hyde? Because he has a physical appearance as opposed to.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about this as this was happening. You would think that, like, when we think of the Hulk, and the Hulk gets all, like, angry and giant, right?
Yeah.
I do find it interesting that the portrayal of Hyde was smaller and more kind of like quick and speedy, and it makes me think of, we talked about this, like almost a little animal, so more animalistic in nature.
Right.
So it's that like
primal.
Yeah,
aspect.
primal. Yeah.
And I think that
urges,
but that was
desires.
key. Like that was key, right?
Yeah.
That was also like, I think, hinting at the evolutionary sort of paradigm that was really popular in the 19th century with Darwinism, right? This idea that like our ancestors who were brutish and violent were like smaller in stature, hairier, more animal sort of figuring, and of course that's like, obviously, like, it's not a very accurate portrayal of that, and there were certain sort of like problematic ideas surrounding that social Darwinism, but that caricaturing of Hyde as almost like a very disfigured, malformed, primitive type of being, very much speaks to, I think, also the ideas at the time, right?
Yeah, that just made me think of another point that just honestly just came to me as we were talking, is that, and I have no idea, I've never read this, it just kind of came to me now, is this idea, because there was almost a fear of the medical world becoming so prevalent that your moral compass diminishes.
Like Frankenstein.
Like Frankenstein, yeah. But the element of the medication here, where the whole medication that he tries to use to, quote unquote, kind of like fix himself in a way to take out the bad and bring, so he can separate himself from evil and good, the more and more he takes that, the more dependent he becomes on it too. And rather than integrating this animalistic behavior and just accepting it as part of human nature, he was trying to not only separate himself from that, but literally just in the social world become this like almost perfect, pure individual that everyone admires. And it's just so interesting when I think of even, and I work in the medical field, so I'm not like anti-medication by any means, but we see this in things like pain medication, where, you know, you fix one issue, maybe you start with one issue, and then it becomes a process of needing more and more and more and more to fix another issue, and that's when, you know, that's when it's not well prescribed or well monitored. Obviously that will happen, and this happened with him. He became so dependent on it, and he couldn't, but then the irony of it all is that the more and more he took it, the more dependent, but then in the end it just stopped working almost altogether, right? Like it just, and we see that with medications, it just slowly weans off and then it stops working altogether, and we still have to face this reality of what we're living in.
And that's the thing. So he tried, like,
we're living with.
Exactly, in your sort of how I'm rephrasing, is like he tried to sever that part of himself, right?
Yeah.
And the disease part, let's say, if we want to take a medical model, he tried to sever it rather than integrate it into his own Jekyll personality.
Yeah.
And by trying to sever it, he actually gave it more power than if he had integrated it within his, you know, his more benefic half, if you will, right? Subsume it within himself, rather than try to eliminate it altogether.
It's almost like he was like talking about getting psychotherapy rather than just using medications alone. Not that I'm against medications for mental health issues, not at all, but we know that even in today's world, right? It's usually not enough to just take medication. We have to integrate parts of us that maybe disturb us or upset us.
Yeah. And just one more quote from
or
here.
We're ashamed of, sorry. Yeah.
I think one quote that will actually fully summarize, in my opinion, like huge part of the moral of this particular story is, for man is not one, but truly two. That's like, I hope I got that right. But that actually cuts to the core of the matter, that within all of us, no matter how virtuous and good that we might feel ourselves or present ourselves in the world, we have that element of, and the capacity to do profound evil.
Yeah, single human,
Every single human, regardless of what you think of yourself. So I think that's one of the most important lessons of this story.
Absolutely. And that, exactly. The the more virtuous we appear, sometimes we're hiding. It's kind of that icky side that we know. Like some people who appear so charismatic, right? So charismatic, so loving, so kind. Well, behind that veil, they could actually be quite awful people. Not awful people, I shouldn't say that, but doing quite awful deeds, you know.
Yeah, and justifying it.
And justifying it by presenting themselves as all good and benevolent. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Moving on to body snatchers.
Moving on to the body snatchers, which is the second story here in this collection.
More about this one. I feel like I kind of fell asleep the whole time.
Oh jeez. Okay. So it just starts off, there's a bunch of fellows in a pub, they're all drinking and they do this regularly and they like to sit by the fireside, which we have nice coals burning here to keep us nice and warm and toasty. It's okay, we'll leave it for now, but I'm already getting warm in my three-piece here.
I'm cool in my non-three-piece.
Non-three-piece. So they're all, they go to this regular place, they always have their little drinks and their chit-chat, and there's this one guy named Fett. And Fett is kind of like a real drunkard and very kind of curmudgeon-y. And then all of the other fellows gathered around him notice that he gets quite disturbed by the appearance of this doctor from London. And this doctor is, very well positioned in society. He's incredibly wealthy, very successful, almost like a celebrity doctor. And so I think they make a weird exchange and comment back and forth whether he's seen him again or something along those lines. So they have this bizarre exchange, and so it comes to light when the gentleman asks their friend Fetz, like, what was that about? And so Fetz used to work as he was in like the medical school, and this is of course in the medical school in Edinburgh. And him and this other associate, there were two students, they were like the head of the class, and they were maybe teachers' pets, who knows, but maybe at the time they weren't really considered teachers' pets, but they volunteered to help their professor in the anatomy sections, and procuring a lot of the cadavers for the students. And this was actually quite common in the 19th century. In fact, at the beginning of the 19th century, it was quite taboo. Because there was a sanctity of the body, and to exhume a buried person was almost to completely desacralize the rite, the body, and the grave. Anyway, so of course, what starts to happen, they realize, is that these bodies are getting fresher and fresher, and one of this Fets actually recognizes this one girl that he had a dalliance with the night before. And she appears, and his other student friend is like, listen, don't worry about it. We just pay the body snatchers, and we don't ask questions. The professor doesn't want to know about it. Let's not talk about this. Let's move on. And sure enough, there's another gentleman named Mr. Gray, whom the other student is very much has a very uncomfortable relationship with. Mr. Gray's a bit of an ass. He's a bit of a bully. And then sure enough, he also ends up on this table, and the Fetz realizes that he was probably murdered by his associate. But this is actually mirroring what Robert Louis Stevenson is doing. He's actually mirroring an actual event or series of events that happened where I think they were named Burke and Hare were the two culprits. And what they would do, of course, they would sell to the anatomy school, but instead of grave robbing, they'll be murdering people, or horrific stuff. And actually, I took Roman law, one of my courses in the theater there, and that was the professor said that's exactly where they actually hid the bodies. So it's like it's a theater viewing area. So it's actually at one of the sort of the circular amphitheaters. It was actually really neat to be in that building.
I just remember when I actually did anatomy with cadavers, it kind of reminds me of the sensation, probably not as horrific as this, as obviously not as horrific as kind of figuring out that people have been murdered for your dissection, but seeing nail polish on cadavers.
It brings the humanity back.
Yeah, so when we were doing torso or lower extremity anatomy, they would cover the face, so you never
Cloth.
with a cloth, yeah. So you never really saw the face, but unless you were actually doing facial anatomy. But yeah, the fingernails kind of got me.
Once we stayed after class, a couple of us, and we asked the instructor, "Can we see the face?" Because it was actually dissected directly in half.
Oh, you're a little.
This is
my morbid.
Listen, I've read too many Gothic stories not to be interested in this stuff. And it was an old gentleman. But what I found most striking was not so much like nail polish or anything like that, but the stubble. And it's like, wow, when you remove the mask and you just look at the stubble, and it's just like almost as if you were to see it on your grandpa or your dad.
Yeah, or the ear. The ear also is very like personal.
It brings the personal element back. You realize that you are actually dealing with a human, a once human being.
Yeah.
And
your connection to that, like, this could easily be me.
Because it's going to sound rather morbid, but I mean, like, muscles look the same whether you're looking at a cow or a horse or a human. Obviously, there's changes in the physiognomy, but like, still though, like there's an element of the striations and the musculature. You can kind of imagine that it's just another thing that you're looking at, and plus the smell is so.
It's easy to dissociate.
But the smell is so off-putting that it doesn't even smell like you're working with something necessarily human.
Yeah, or even rotting. It just smells medical.
Yeah, it's like this very dull brown color. It's like almost, I don't know about yours, how...
A lot of them were, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's when they start to get old, actually.
Exactly.
Anyway. I actually can still kind of taste, because when you breathe, you start to taste.
And she says I'm morbid.
No, when you start to breathe in the fumes, you start to taste, like, it just like, I remember going home and showering and being like, I can't get the smell off of me.
It's like, they don't use formaldehyde anymore. It's another thing.
It's still stinky.
Yeah. And I believe there's, just a side note, there's a molecule called cadaverine, and that's what actually gives you the smell of dead bodies. Which apparently, if you've smelled a dead body before, you'll never forget that smell. It really sticks with you.
Okay. That's enough.
Moving on. Okay.
We went from creepy to gory.
Creepy to gory?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I guess we did. Okay, last one. I think you're gonna like pronouncing this one.
Olalla.
Olalla.
Olalla?
Olalla. I would like to know what the provenance of that word is. Or that name.
Olalla. It's just like rolls off the tongue really lovely.
Olalla.
Olalla. Olalla.
Okay, we're gonna stop doing that.
Sorry.
Just for our viewers. So it's set in. It's a soldier, and he actually to kind of like convalesce. He goes to Spain. His doctor says you got to go to Spain.
Yeah.
It's where all the Brits are like hanging out because apparently
convalescing.
A lot of British people love to go and vacation in Spain, so that's an actual thing.
Yeah.
But he goes to Spain. He goes to an old palatial residence, and there's this old aristocratic family.
It's a little bit weird.
They're a little bit weird. They don't kind of like blend in. They don't hang out with the locals because they're above the locals. They're pure bloods.
Yes.
But in a weird way.
Maybe a little incest.
Incest?
Yes.
Yeah. And so anyway, so he goes there and they're like, the doctor's like, they might like you actually. It was the doctor or the priest. Anyway, they're like, you're a handsome guy. They might take a fondness for you. So there's a young guy.
Yeah.
And he's a little bit like slow.
Yeah.
Slow-witted.
Slow but weirdly quick. Slow in the head, but quick in his movements.
That's right, yeah. And very kind of like agile. And then he's got an older sister who's very beautiful and mysterious.
And very religious.
Very devout. Yeah.
Pious.
Yes, pious. And they have an old mother.
She's not old though. She's actually quite young and beautiful. Is the way they described her, no?
No, she was old.
She was always like lazing around, and her eyes were sensuous. There's something sensuous.
Are you talking about the young woman?
No, the mother.
Oh, the mother?
Yeah, there's something sensuous about her.
Sensuous, maybe languorous. Languorous, and like she's always in a very slow, deliberate movements, nothing hurried about her, nothing urgent she needs
even
to
her
do.
speech is like disjointed and nonsensical.
And almost in a dreamlike.
Whimsical,
she's always in a dreamlike state.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, it was a lot of description. I find this one is highly descriptive.
Yeah, I didn't mind the description, but
It was beautiful description, but there wasn't much. There wasn't enough dialogue.
Yeah.
And there wasn't. Yeah, it was very atmospheric. I guess is
Yeah.
the best way to describe it.
It wasn't really creepy, was it?
Well, there was that one moment, which is the moment in the story, where he cuts himself and the mother freaks out and bites his finger, and she starts viciously trying to attack him. And then he's like, "What the heck is going on?"
Yeah.
And then it slowly comes to light that she is of an ancestral lineage of vampires, and there's vampirism that's happened. Even though he's madly in love with this young woman, Olalla. Was she Olalla?
The young girl's Olalla.
Yeah. And then she was like, "No, no, no, no."
She's like, "No.
No, we cannot be
Although
together.
I love you, you must leave.
You
Leave me. If you love me, or leave me."
Yeah. And wasn't there a hint somewhere? Maybe I'm making this up. That like there were other men who were lovers, but she had kind of like.
Oh, I didn't hear that. I missed that.
Maybe we were both in a dreamlike state when we were reading this.
Yes.
It's quite possible. So anyway, okay, let's rate these out of spookiness. From 0 to absolutely not spooky to 10 the craziest spookiness.
I want you to go first.
Wait, which one? Dr. Jekyll and
Yeah,
Mr.
we
Hyde?
start in order. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
I would give it in spookiness a level of a... Oh, we do out of 5, don't we? Not out of 10.
Do we? Okay, 5 out of 5.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Maybe we
Sorry
change
about
it
that.
up each week.
Yeah, I would give it a 3.9 out of 5.
Oh yeah, we do. I would concur on that one.
Concur.
Okay, and the body snatchers.
Body Snatcher, to be honest, the final scene freaked me out a little bit. It gave me chills. I would give it a 4 out of 5.
4 out of 5. Okay, I'll give it a 3.2 because I maybe was very sleepy that day.
Jeez, this must be my wonderfully lilting voice, that kind of sonorous.
No, I had a long week.
It's a soporific, it puts you to sleep.
No, I just had a long week.
Just a long week.
Okay.
And the last one, Olalla?
Olalla. I wouldn't really say it was that creepy. I'm gonna give it a creaky maybe. Creepy, no.
Creaky in the old movements.
Yeah, I do imagine like when you're going into each of the little rooms because it was quite a like old place, right?
I just imagine her like.
And it was creepy from.
But I just imagine her like desiccated, like completely dried up, and she just needs like an inch.
Like a blow, like a.
No, but she needs like.
Problems?
No, she needs like blood to like re-energize her. You know what I mean? Like.
For some reason I didn't see that because she was like, there's something alluring about her. They always describe her as like alluring in a way.
Of course, it's a vampiric charm.
Yes.
So I would say 3.2. What would you say?
I'd say 3.1.
Oh wow. Okay. So.
Olalla. But it was still good. But it was. Yeah, I think it's just that in our time, there's been so many vampire stories that there was nothing. This is like one of the probably original scenes of. And so now it's been, obviously pieces have been taken from this and on other vampires to create something that's
like
kind
Twilight.
Oh,
boo.
let's not go there.
So, anyway, so we want to, we're not going to be satisfied with just this this one series, but we've been reading a lot of short stories, and we want to get into some novellas, and we definitely want to explore in this book marathon, Halloween marathon, like, a lot of our other gothic stories and horror stories. She doesn't really like them that much. I've been reading them ever since I was 17, so I have a lot.
That's not true. I like the ones that have like a fairy tale moral to them. So that's not entirely true.
Yeah, it's like bordering fantasy.
Yeah, no, it's not true because one that we're going to present that we just recently read
was like a folktale for you.
Yeah, it felt like a folktale.
Yeah.
And are we going to give a list of some of those ones upcoming so that people can perhaps read in advance?
Sure, I guess so.
Okay, so maybe give a couple of them.
Like, just the authors, not so much the stories per se.
Give two. Well, we know two that for sure that we're going to be reading. So one is
Algernon Blackwood, and the story that we read, it was quite a bit of a long short story. It was called.
It's good though.
The Man Whom the Trees Loved.
Yes.
The Man Whom the Trees Loved. And that was quite beautifully evocative.
Yeah, we're gonna. So if you want to read for next week, that's one we're gonna review.
The other one is Clark Ashton Smith, and he is kind of like the protege of H.P. Lovecraft. So he does weird fiction, And this one was a fairy tale like, and I don't recall what it was called.
Rabbit?
Oh, yes. We have returned. This one was called.
Frog Lady or something.
I like Mother of Toads.
Oh, Mother of Toads.
Frog Lady or Mother of Toads. Frog Lady is probably a scarier title. So this one by Clark Ashton Smith was another one that we are going to cover and do a review on. And I wanted to do one on the original vampire story. I'm sure a vampire, the Vurdalaki, if you want to think about Eastern
Ooh,
mythos.
I like the way you rolled your
Vurdalaki. These are ancient stories about vampirism and vampires. But one of the earliest ones that we know of is Polidori's The Vampire with a Y. And I thought maybe we would read that one. But if you're totally up to here with vampire stories already, we can move on to something else. But for now, we will be continuing on with some of these. And one other thing, which is my favorite English ghost story writer ever, Montague Rhodes James, M.R. James. Or if you want to be cheeky, Mr. James. But it's definitely M.R. James, not Mr.
Only Sean calls him Mr.
When you're that big, they call you Mr. So definitely any story by M.R. James. Particularly, I could recommend the number 13, Whistle and I'll Come to You, My Lad.
Ooh, that even sounds creepy.
Yeah, ooh, that one is slightly creepy. Ooh, it gave me chills actually just to think about it. Anything by M.R. James is absolute gold.
Great. Okay, and so then again, we're nominating
Tristan and the classics. We are looking to you, my friend, for your sharing of 19th century, and it could be early 20th century. Let's broaden it a little bit. Ghost stories, horror stories, spooky stories.
anything that gives you goose pimples or goosebumps.
She loves it when they say goose pimples instead of goosebumps. It just gives to her a little.
Gives me actual goosebumps.
Yeah, a little frisson.
Yeah.
Of unpleasantness. Okay.
Okay.
Well, anyway, you have yourselves a nice evening. Hopefully, you're sitting also by a fire or a toaster.
Or something. A toaster.
Maybe not a toaster.
Eating toast.
So, you're eating toast by a toaster. This video's for you.
Or sipping a tea or something delightfully warm.
Okay. Well, we'll see you soon. Sooner than usual. Take care for now. Bye-bye.